To say that this movie is an incredible feat would be an understatement. To say that Joe and Anthony Russo had an impossible job would be an understatement. Avengers Endgame managed to do the impossible. It managed to serve as a satisfying conclusion for millions of fans who have been following these movies, these characters, for over 10 years. It managed to wrap up pretty much every story beat and arc for an absurd number of characters. It managed to make audience members laugh. It managed to make them cheer, and it managed to make them sob. So when I saw this movie, when I saw it twice the same weekend, I expected to feel magic. I have been vocally very critical of a lot of MCU movies, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't a fan. I was one of those nerds who had been religiously watching every MCU movie since I was 10 years old. I grew up with the MCU. I started off watching Iron Man with my parents opening weekend, and over the next 10 years, I watched every single MCU movie in the theater opening weekend. I watched and rewatched them all on DVD, then on Blu-ray, now on 4K Blu-ray. I saw Avengers 6 times in the theater. 6. And no joke, I think I've seen Iron Man 2 over 20 times.
What?
I believe that comic books, movies, and comic book movies have the mythic potential to inspire, to emotionally impact, to make you feel something real. The MCU has done that and probably will do that again, but you're not here for that. You're here because you saw the title and either got angry, got a sense of validation because maybe you felt the same way, or you're just taking a shit on the toilet and got intrigued. Either way, you're here for me to explain why I didn't love. I think to fully explain why Endgame didn't work for me, I have to come out and say that Infinity War didn't work for me. Yes, I was that angry prick who left the theater complaining while everyone else was raving. I loved a lot of stuff about Infinity War, mainly the Guardians, specifically Rocket, Thor, and Groot, and I loved Thanos. I loved how the space scenes looked. I loved that final shot of Thanos, and I loved the idea that Thanos won and we saw our heroes lose. But I didn't love the ultra-fast pacing that left me unable to be fully invested in any one character or grand moment, the bland and downright ugly visuals on Earth, and of course the constant need to throw a joke in there even if it breaks the tone and drama of a scene. Oh, and I hated Bruce Banner, but we'll get to him later. I felt like a freak, more than usual, for not loving Infinity War. The world was obsessed with the film and I was obsessed with why I couldn't love it. I respected the hell out of the Russos for making a movie with this many lead characters that didn't completely suck, but I was, honestly, bitter. You know the feeling. You've hated food that everyone loved. You've hated TV shows that everyone couldn't stop talking about. But the thing about disliking something that the majority of people love is that it's fucking miserable. You want to taste what they taste. You want to see what they see, and you so desperately want to feel what they feel. I refuse to believe there are people out there who enjoy hating something. They may pretend to, they may make a YouTube video ranting about it, but deep down they want to love it just as much as everyone else. And that's how I felt going into Endgame. I wanted to love it. I wanted to agree with the popular opinion. I figured that since half the characters from Infinity War were killed off, the pacing would slow down. We would focus on the original 6 Avengers and get a personal story about Steve Rogers and Tony Stark. And to be fair, I got that, kind of. I got that, but to me it felt rushed. Is it asking too much for a movie that's 3 hours long to be even longer? Yes. Is it ridiculous to ask a movie that's 3 hours long and has the impossible task of concluding this 22 movie story to slow the pacing down and allow moments to breathe? Probably. Did I want both of those things? Hell yes. We open Endgame on a very Russo scene of Hawkeye's family getting dusted. It's raw, focused entirely on emotion. We get to see part of the human element of the snap, which we didn't get to see much of in Infinity War. We see how someone without superpowers, someone with a family, is affected by this universe-altering event. And these are my favorite moments of the film, the ones where the raw, handheld Russo style is utilized to connect us to these icons. The moments in the first act where the movie can slow down and have Steve and Natasha talk about moving on, Scott Lang scramble to find his daughter, and Tony Stark spend time with his. But sadly, to me, a lot of these moments that should make me feel something real are overshadowed by the need to keep the plot moving forward. Let me ask you something before we continue. Did you notice that Peter Quill came back to Earth? I know you saw him in the final battle, but did the filmmaking or writing ever call attention to the fact that Quill has finally returned to his home planet after successfully avoiding it for the majority of his life? Earth, where Peter Quill's mother died. Shouldn't Quill have some kind of reaction to being home? Anything. Isn't that a very important step in his ongoing growth? One line, one look, one moment spent on that instead of on this giant CG muck would have been enough. Anyways, we then go to the Milano where Tony and Nebula, the best character in the film, have spent months drifting through space. We get this great monologue where Tony seems to be losing hope that he'll make it back to Pepper, to Earth, what's left of Earth. For a brief second, we feel the stakes of this situation. I say for a brief second because literally less than half a minute later, Captain Marvel shows up and saves the duo. We get a taste of the grief and hopelessness Tony is feeling before the movie is forced to move along. We never really get to see the struggles Nebula and Tony have to go through surviving on this ship. We get a montage and some voiceover explaining it. We see the aftermath of no food and no oxygen, but we don't get to feel it, really feel it. Being stranded in space could have served as a wonderful parallel to being kept captive in a cave, but instead of Tony Stark coming out of it an Iron Man, he comes out of it a broken man. And don't get me wrong, he does come out of it broken for one great scene before the Avengers go to space, find Thanos, figure out he destroyed the stones, chop off his head, and then off-screen development.
Did you get that?
It may sound ridiculous to say this, but I promise you I'm not being hyperbolic. This is where the movie started to lose me when I first saw it, 20 minutes in. I assumed there would be some kind of time jump from the end of Infinity War, but what I didn't expect is how much character development would happen during that time jump. Character development that we only see the aftermath of. The grief of the world is seen after 5 years. Endgame seems to be obsessed with showing the aftermath of grief, but not the initial grief itself. We don't get to feel the horrible effects of the snap outside of Hawkeye, because the initial civilian reaction to billions of families, billions of friends, and billions of children being dusted, murdered because the Avengers failed, occurs off-screen during the time jump. Rocket becomes an Avenger, matures immensely, and makes a whole new family for himself off-screen during the time jump. We see him and Nebula grieve for a millisecond, but that's it. Does he expect Quill and some of the other Guardians to be with Nebula and Stark? Does he feel guilty for leaving them behind to go build Stormbreaker with Thor? How does he feel knowing that he
lost the only family I ever had? Quill, Groot, Drax, the chick with the antenna, all gone.
And how did he mature to the point where he welcomed a new one into his heart? Our heroes do a lot of talking about how they failed by not being together, but we never see them grieve together. Bruce Banner completes his entire character arc, the arc that has been set up since the first Avengers, Incredible Hulk even, off-screen during the time jump. The Russos clearly don't give much of a shit about Bruce Banner. To be frank, no director really has other than Joss Whedon. So all the possible internal conflict Bruce could be feeling about being stuck big and green is just played for laughs. Do you guys remember when Bruce Banner was the best part of the Avengers?
I got low. I didn't see an end, so I put a bullet in my mouth and the other guy spit it out. Damn.
Tony Stark gets married to Pepper, a relationship we have been following since 2008, off-screen during the time jump. Oh, and Tony Stark has his first and only child, off-screen during the time jump. Just showing us one of those moments of Tony walking away from Iron Man, from the hero life, and deciding to be happy with Pepper would make his eventual sacrifice that much more impactful. Show us the wedding, show us the birth, give us a montage or something. Show us those monumentally important moments of life instead of implying them. Tony forgives Steve and gives up being resentful off-screen during the time jump. He grows from Civil War, where he is left pretty alone and filled with anger towards Cap, to Infinity War, where he shares no scenes with his old friend, to the beginning of Endgame, where he clearly still carries that resentment.
No clues, no strategies, no options, zero zip, nada. No trust. Liar.
Then the 5-year time jump happens and
Turns out resentment is corrosive, and I hate it. Me too.
listen, I understand that a lot can change in 5 years. All of the development for these characters that happened during the 5-year time jump makes perfect sense. They are all natural conclusions to established arcs, but the problem is, my problem is, we don't see any of it. I understand skipping over some of these moments. The film even knows it skipped over a lot of key character development, so they give us these half-baked conclusions through expository dialogue.
For years, I've been treating the Hulk like he's some kind of disease, something to get rid of.
But then I start looking at him as the cure.
I just want peace. I thought my dad was tough on me. And now, looking back on it, I just remember the good stuff.
You ever hear the saying, show, don't tell? Avengers Endgame, because of the massive size of the plot and the sheer number of characters, does a lot of telling, but not nearly enough showing for me to connect with these characters like I have in previous films. It feels like I missed the most important chapter in this gigantic book. A chapter where Steve Rogers decides to be happy, decides he can be happy. Endgame doesn't seem to be about working towards that realization. It reminds us of Peggy, has scenes and dialogue of Steve longing for Peggy.
I went in the ice in 45 right after I met the love of my life.
But doesn't really remind us why she matters to Steve, what that dance represents, and shows us about how far his character has come. It's a beautiful way to end the movie. It's very Spider-Man 3, and I adore it, but it didn't feel earned to me. It felt like they knew they wanted to end the movie and Chris Evans' contract with that dance, so they had to remind the general audience of Peggy's existence. Have Steve look at her picture, have Steve tell himself that he has to move on before realizing that it's okay not to. I guess I wanted Endgame to be all about that realization, all about Steve learning that it's okay to be happy. In Age of Ultron, Steve Rogers comes to the conclusion that he didn't need the simple life. He convinced himself that he felt at home becoming the leader of the Avengers.
The simple life.
You get there one day.
I don't know. Family, stability. Guy who wanted all that went in the ice 75 years ago. I think someone else came out.
In Civil War, that is immediately torn apart. After Peggy's death, Cap decides Bucky is where his loyalties lie and the Avengers are torn apart. Cap and his pals are now on the run. But we don't see any of that because Infinity War takes place 4 years later. 4 years of Steve, Natasha, Sam, and Wanda being on the run. So maybe during those 4 years, he started to realize that being Cap wasn't enough. Maybe he needs to be Steve from Brooklyn. Maybe he needs that dance. I honestly don't know because in Endgame I can only catch glimpses of that idea before jumping to another character's story, then to another character's, then to another. Between defeating Thanos and returning the stones, Steve decides the war is over and it's time for him to go live a real life. I just wish I knew, wish I saw when and why he made that choice. Was it because of Tony's sacrifice? Maybe if the entire movie had been more focused on Cap and Iron Man, maybe if the entire film had led to their respective endings, I would feel the weight of it. I often hear the argument that you have to view Endgame as the conclusion of all the movies, and not as a traditional film with a traditional focus. And that's a completely fair argument. But to me, Black Widow's death, Hawkeye becoming Ronin, Bruce accepting Hulk, Rocket dealing with losing his family and building a new one, Thor battling self-doubt and depression, Nebula fully growing into a hero, Cap realizing he can be happy, Tony becoming happy and then sacrificing that and himself for the greater good, all feel like they deserve their own movie. They are all great ideas, great storylines that are crammed together and not given nearly enough time because they have to be. Depressed Thor is a great idea on paper. Imagine a solo Thor movie where he's depressed, overweight, an alcoholic, and most importantly, afraid. Afraid of failure. Afraid that he is not worthy. Sounds like a great movie, wonderful movie. Now, because Endgame is already filled with fairly serious storylines, they have to take that Thor storyline and exaggerate it to the point of being pure goof.
Noob Master.
Yeah, Noob Master 69.
This has to happen. The pacing has to be quick. The editing has to be tight. So tight that 3 minutes in one Hulk scene after Tony declares that time travel is impossible.
Oh, because it's laughable? Because it's a pipe dream?
Several bad puns later.
He figures out time travel.
Shit!
Character arcs have to occur during the time jump. Characters have to stumble into life-changing moments of closure.
The door's this way, pal.
Otherwise, the movie would be 9 hours long. Is it fair to ask Endgame, a movie that has the heart to cover all of these ideas, character arcs, and themes, and do an entire time travel plot, to slow down and focus? Truly focus on just a few of those themes. The truth is, I don't know. The tone balancing is also much messier than previous Avengers films. A lot of heartfelt moments are undermined by these harsh cuts to comedic scenes. Or this weirdly placed bit of action where both heroes try to stop each other from committing suicide. Oh, that's right, just like the movie, I almost forgot. Black Widow fucking dies. And we cut away after a mere 20 seconds of processing her death. The rest of the Avengers mourn her for around 2 minutes before we go back to the plot and back to the jokes. One of their dear friends, one of their family members died, and we spend not nearly enough time lingering on their grief and sorrow for Natasha's death to feel meaningful. And that's a gosh darn shame. We get a brief mention of her death again during Tony's funeral, but I'm left wondering why Nick Fury has nothing to say about losing someone that he took in. Actually, why does Nick Fury have nothing to say about any of this? Tony Stark, Natasha Romanoff are dead, Nick has nothing to say, and in the next movie, he is on an extended vacation? For a movie that, in theory, is about grief, trauma, and overcoming that grief and trauma, there is an overabundance of the typical jokes and quips that Marvel has been doing since the first Avengers. I'm not expecting a dark, tragic tale with zero humor. As you all know, some of my favorite movies are cheesy as hell, but there are often times during Endgame where I feel like there should be a laugh track.
What's up, regular size man?
I'm going to mention Whedon a lot throughout this video. Maybe that's because I'm a diehard fan of the first Avengers film. I even love a lot of Ultron. Or maybe it's because there is such a tangible difference between how he writes and directs banter and humor to how Marcus McFeely and the Russos do it. Whedon almost never flat out stops the movie for a joke. And when he does, it all comes from character. The humor, the quips, they all come from a natural place within these characters. For example, this doesn't ruin the momentum of a scene and mess with the tone.
What's it look like in there?
It seems to run on some form of electricity.
Well, you're not wrong.
This does.
That is America's ass.
Both those moments take place during high-stress scenes, but the stress never stops with Whedon. He treats every dialogue scene like a battle, every witty remark hits with quick precision and is perfectly in character. The lighting may be flat and uninspired, but there's tangible conflict, drama, tension in the way it's written and directed. It never pauses for a brief chuckle.
Time travel! What?
You took everything from me.
I don't even know who you are.
I originally was going to have a whole section on Thanos, but this line right here sums up why Thanos doesn't work for me in Endgame. This Thanos has never met any of the Avengers. He has no connection to them. He knows about them, but he's never directly faced any of them. That Thanos is killed in the first 15 minutes of the movie. Endgame needs a physical threat to come in during the third act so we can have a giant CG war, and that's the exact purpose Thanos and his army serve. That's it. There isn't much else to analyze or dissect, which sucks because Thanos was for sure my favorite part of Infinity War. He was turned from a villain who believed he was right, believed so hard in his beliefs that we could almost understand his perspective, to a two-dimensional supervillain for the Avengers to punch. Hey now, I like some of it. Now, it may seem like I hate this movie. I spent the last however many minutes talking about why the film didn't work for me, and I'm going to continue to spend however many minutes until this video is over doing the same thing. But you can have a lot of problems with something you still love aspects of. The score by Alvin Silvestri is my favorite MCU score. The amount of callbacks to previous themes from previous movies has my ears grinning every time I listen. The crazy time travel nostalgia trip through the MCU is a brilliant idea. It's a love letter to the past 10 years, it's filled with fun fan service, and it's just fucking cool, man. Tony's death and the funeral that follows being the slowest scenes in the film almost gives it the weight it deserves. Thank God Jeffrey Ford, one of the editors of Endgame, suggested they reshoot his death and have Tony say,
And I am Iron Man.
I love old man Steve Rogers. I love this moment.
How'd that work out for you? It was beautiful.
I love Nebula, and I love the idea that she literally kills the side of her controlled by Thanos, controlled by abuse. I love the portals moment. I love a lot of the dialogue and the delivery of that dialogue from the actors who are now so comfortable in their character's skin. I love this callback.
Cheeseburgers?
I love the fact that the song we end the entire Infinity Saga on was the one Steve listened to in his apartment in Winter Soldier. And I especially love these credits where the actors sign off as the Avengers theme roars. Before we continue talking about things I don't love about Avengers Endgame, there is one thing in the world that I truly love, and that is